WBTV's 10th anniversary marks the first dynamic decade of television entertainment in the Carolinas.
Someone realized that we ought to be writing down what we were doing and when we were doing it.
You're looking good and getting better every day.
40 years of great days here at WBTV.
We're looking back at the ways we've changed over the years.
And boy, have we.
It's really good to have you with us as we celebrate our first 60 years as a television station here in Charlotte.
70 years, and what a ride it has been.
This is an On Your Side Tonight special. WBTV celebrates 75 years.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for this special edition of On Your Side Tonight. I'm Jamie Bull. Standing here in this place on this night, the 75th anniversary of WBTV signing on the air is, well, a little overwhelming and a whole lot humbling. You know, you can't walk through this studio, especially tonight, and not be reminded of those who came before. If you look and you listen closely enough, you'll swear you can still see their faces and hear their voices. Tonight, we're going to take a trip down memory lane. We'll catch up with some old friends. We'll swap a few stories. 75 years in the making. 12 noon, 75 years ago.
People crowded the streets in front of TV store windows.
Came a moment in Charlotte history.
Officials of the Jefferson Standard Broadcasting Company waited before a dark television set with fingers crossed.
The night before, anticipation built. 12,000 people packed the old Charlotte Armory to hear more about what this new thing called television was all about. The next day, when the button was pushed,
This is the first television broadcasting signal in the two Carolinas. Now we present test pattern and tone for set adjustment.
WBTV came on the air, and Jim Patterson was there.
And the day that I read that first sign-on was absolutely wild. And you know, I don't think anybody on the staff thought we'd really get on the air, that all of this would manage to work. You see, I had to be at the transmitter at Spencer Mountain at 12 noon for the sign-on. And everything was up in the air at the Wilder Building Studios, of course. And naturally, I got a late start. And practically had to fly those 26 miles to get there on time, roaring out Wilson Boulevard at 85 miles an hour all the way. But we did just make it.
Store windows is how most saw those early days, a patchwork of programming like Kukla, Fran and Ollie, Lucky Pup, Arthur Godfrey. Only 1,000 people in the area even had a TV. The fall of 1950 brought another monumental moment and another announcement from Jim Patterson.
In a few moments, a memorable event in the advancement of television in this area will occur. Television programs from the 4 television networks will be arriving in this control room at the WBTV studios.
The first thing viewers took in, football. Highlights of, well, Notre Dame beating UNC. But before long, a flood of new entertainment was beaming into Carolina homes. Burns and Allen.
At least we've got some good food, so we'll,
The Cisco Kid.
Here's O. Henry's famous Robin Hood of the Old West.
And I Love Lucy. By May of '51, 75,000 TV sets were in area homes. Quickly, there became an appetite for programming, and the network only had so much. It was an opportunity to go local, an opportunity which created a generation of crossover pioneers. WBT radio personalities headed to WBTV television. The names now legendary: Arthur Smith and the Cracker Jacks, Grady Cole, Lunas McGlowan, Fred Kirby.
We've got the two fronts working, one of them.
And a man who to this day is as memorable to the WBTV audience as anyone.
Clyde McLean and the 6:40 p.m. weather has been on the air at the same time since the very beginning of television.
Clyde became Cloudy McLean. As the story goes, one winter's day he forecast cloudy weather. Instead, it snowed, and a viewer called to say he was sweeping 6 inches of cloudy off his walk. The name stuck, and so did the man, along with the likes of Jim Patterson and WBTV's first newsman, the SO reporter, Doug Mays.
Well, Jim and Doug and I were pretty young in those days, and we didn't realize that we were working for an industry that was probably going to fail in a year or two. People and critics said that families would tire of watching that plywood box every night, but they didn't.
It didn't because innovation and experimentation became the norm. A 3-camera remote shoot of Dwight Eisenhower's Freedom Park speech in 1954 was groundbreaking. It led to nationwide broadcasts of Billy Graham crusades and Edward R. Murrow interviews.
Harry Golden makes his home and his office in this 9-room frame house on Elizabeth Avenue in Charlotte.
There were big local productions, variety shows, musicals, documentaries, and even wrestling. Eventually, WBTV would broadcast in color. In fact, Betty Feezor's show was the first in the world to be video recorded in color.
On this very cold and getting much colder wind.
The advancements would roll on over the decades. Film, videotape, satellite trucks. And new programs and new names would be introduced, soon to be household in their own right. Mike McKay was one.
A great day here on Top of the Day.
There was Bob Inman, C.J. Underwood, Vivian Harris, Paul Cameron, and Barbara McKay. And many more would follow. They are the faces and the voices that built a station, a legacy, now 75 years old and counting.
You know, just like in those early days, local, original programming still the backbone of WBTV. Right now, every week, we produce more than 15 hours of it. Much of it, of course, local news. And over the last 75 years, we have been fortunate to have some of the finest journalists in the country working for you. WBTV's John Carter had the chance to catch up with one of them.
John? Oh, you better believe it, Jamie. Among the best, award-winning former anchor Bob Inman. Many things have changed in the television news industry since Bob first worked at WBTV, but the most important things have not. Things such as truth, facts, and integrity. And no one has epitomized those characteristics more than Bob Inman. And I had the opportunity to sit down with Bob to talk about the newsroom culture back then and what coverage of news in the future looks to be.
Tonight, Clyde McLean, Jim Thacker, Janet England, and Bob Inman.
Bob Inman first came to Charlotte and WBTV in 1970 as the station's 11 p.m. anchor.
It was a quality place, and it was the on-air staff. They were the people who I figured out very quickly had invented local television in the Carolinas. People who had been there, some of them since the very beginning.
The U.S. Supreme Court today upheld
It wasn't long before station managers and the viewing audience recognized just how talented Bob was. He was named co-anchor of the station's signature 6 p.m. newscast, reporting alongside legendary anchor Doug Mays.
They decided to go to an hour at 6 o'clock. So I joined Doug on the 6 o'clock newscast, first co-anchor situation in the station, and also anchored the 11.
Back in the 70s, the newsroom was certainly an interesting place to work.
The newsroom was full of characters, a lot of off-the-wall humor, and sometimes things being thrown across the newsroom. I mean, it was a wild and woolly, almost Wild West place. We could get into huge arguments, but we knew that at 6 o'clock we were going to go on the air and the arguments were over. But just strong personalities and people that you respected their opinion because they were professionals.
Bob was the consummate professional, a journalist, and to this day is considered one of the finest anchors ever at WBTV, or the industry itself for that matter.
You rarely heard a complaint about one of our air personalities. The only one I got was the lady who wrote in and said, "Shame on you, a man of your age dyeing your hair." And I had to write back and say, "Ma'am, I don't dye my hair." And I'm 80 years old now and I still don't dye my hair.
We're proud of you, Bob. Congratulations.
The news department will not be the same without you.
Bob eventually left the news business in 1996 to pursue a full-time career as a writer.
I had published 3 novels and had started doing screenplay work. I adapted my first novel, Home Fires Burning, for Hallmark Hall of Fame, and I felt like I could go to the mailbox every once in a while and get a little check out of there that would allow Paulette to go to the grocery store. So we talked about it, and she said, if you don't do it now, you'll regret that you didn't do it. So I did. I left to write.
And Bob's advice to the journalists of today, he recalls another journalist who defined news as whatever is true and significant.
When you go on the air with a story, you'll make your best effort to make sure it's true and to make sure that it's significant to the audience. You check your facts. If you're wrong, you make a correction, but you want to put news on the air that is significant to people, that is relevant to the way they live their lives and their kids' lives and their families and their community.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, Bob and his wife Paulette recently moved to Franklin, Tennessee to be closer to family, and his latest book, called Villages, is the story of a young war veteran who comes back to his southern hometown to get his life back together, and it's scheduled to come out in February of next year. Jamie, I am proud to say I worked alongside Bob Inman. He was truly my mentor.
His words still ring true today. John, thank you. Coming up next.
Well, it's that time of year again. Time for you to get a lovely turkey and bake it and have it ready for our special holiday meal.
This show, our first, is still driving the future of WBTV. How Betty Feezor's legacy is still part of this building and viewers' lives.
And remember this, the NFL coming to Charlotte in 1995, and WBTV was the official TV station of the Carolina Panthers. Nearly 10 years later, the Panthers took on the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 28 in Houston, Texas. Didn't end the way we wanted, but WBTV was there for it all. Well, you know what? This kitchen we're in right now hasn't always looked this way. You know it now as the home to our QC Life shows, where you'll often see cooking demonstrations hosted now by Kristen Miranda and Jorge Andres.
Yeah, but the cooking started well before now with the Betty Feezor show. Oh boy, did it ever. It ran on WBTV from 1953 to 1977. Now, Betty liked to call it the world's largest home economics class. From cooking to crafting and DIY, people stopped what they were doing every day at 1 o'clock to see what Betty was up to. But this next story is not just a piece of history. It is proof that one woman's legacy is still driving the future of what you see on WBTV and touching the lives of even our youngest viewers. You make a darn good burger, man.
Thank you.
The best chefs, the coolest events in town, new businesses opening.
I'm out here at the Bowl at Valentine.
We share it all twice a day live on WBTV's QC Life lifestyle shows. All of this is rooted in this.
Here's one of the nation's top television authorities, Betty Feezor.
Hello. Our show for today begins right here with the lesson in how to make a scarf.
That's Betty Feezor, the station's first lifestyle host, one of the first in the country. And this is her son, Bob.
I remember how the public just loved her, and just everyone came up to her when we were out, and they just loved her. But that love was a two-way street, because Betty Feezor sincerely respected and loved the people that she talked to every day on WBTV.
Time for you to get a lovely turkey.
Betty's show was the first in the world to be video recorded in color in 1958. And Betty worked in the very same studio where we now produce QC Morning and QC at 3. It's called the Feezor Studio. I think, what Betty was doing then is truly what people are asking us here at QC Life to still do today.
And she would be so thrilled that you all honor her and remember her. She'd be delighted by it.
So many of you still tell us stories of watching Betty with your mom or grandmom. And then we met a young girl who found Betty all on her own.
Apricot, cream tarts, Miss Mulcher's butterscotch pie, Method's pie, cherry pie.
Callie Heagle's third grade teacher at Community School of Davidson assigned the class a Charlotte history lesson, research someone from the QC's past, and give a speech as them. Callie chose Betty Feezor.
We had to dress up, so I looked at a picture and I had a wig and this dress with a jacket.
Tell me about your speech. What did you say about her in your speech?
Well, I said all about her baking. I said she loved peanut butter and stuff like that. You like peanut butter?
You like the flavor of peanut butter? Well, I talk to just as many adults who enjoy peanut butter as children, it seems.
Callie's mom thought it was cute. She sent me some pictures, and I sent them to Bob.
Talk about making my day. My goodness, I am a huge Callie Eagle fan. I mean, little mini Betty. First of all, she nailed Betty Feezor. My goodness, she dressed like her, she talked like her, she smiled like her.
But the story didn't end there. Bob sent Callie a care package at her school.
I looked at the box and I was like, what? I got a package from Bob Feezor?
Inside, some note cards with Betty's catchphrase and a copy of one of her books. For
Callie. For Callie, thanks for doing such a great job
portraying
my mother, Betty Feezor.
Now the two are unexpected pen pals. Pals for life. Did you think that all of this was gonna come from one school project?
Nope.
What do you think now that it has?
I'm glad that I chose Betty Feezor.
And we're glad WBTV bet on Betty too, all those years ago.
Betty Feezor would be so thrilled to know that 75 years later, WBTV is still full of great broadcasters, but especially full of wonderful people like you and all your coworkers.
Until then, this is Betty Feezor. Goodbye.
We love Callie too. Betty passed away from cancer shortly after ending her show, but she would turn 100 years old this February, Jamie. Clearly her legacy is still very strong. We feel her in the studio all the time.
And through the mini Bettys of the world as well. Kristen, thank you. Coming up on this special edition of On Your Side Tonight.
It's the only station I ever wanted to work for because this is the only station we ever watched.
From snow to hurricanes, WBTV has always been on your side, and that includes these four people, how they remember covering and tracking major weather events. And remember when WBTV moved out of the Wilder building? We got our start at 3rd and Tryon in uptown Charlotte. But in 1955, staff packed up all the boxes and moved us into the building we're in now. We're standing here in the First Alert Weather Center. You know, it's come a long way since Clyde McLean drew on a whiteboard. This is a place that is now home to the best forecasters and the best technology in the area. All of it keeping you one step ahead of the next storm. And as you know, we have seen some rough ones over the years. Here's Chief Meteorologist Al Conklin and friends.
Nobody believes this, that the Weather Center was downstairs.
Thank God I was in my 20s and early 30s because the number of sprints that I did down that hall.
Oh my God.
Did you see the opening to Broadcast News where she's running with the tape?
I do remember
We had to do that with film every night from the newsroom to the film chain.
Yeah.
And guess who had to do it?
Yeah. You were here for starting with the 30th?
Yes.
All right. Tell me a little bit about how things have evolved from the 30th to the 75th.
Well, weather hasn't evolved. It's just a different storm, different day.
Yeah.
Forecasting has. Clyde McLean used to be on the board with a marking pen, a grease pen, and would just draw it all out.
Honestly speaking, Charlotte, the entire TV market was way behind the curve in terms of hiring meteorologists at that time. Within like 2 months of when I got here, we had an F4 tornado go through Raleigh. Then that was followed up the next year with Hugo. And we had still yet to have any meteorological diagnostic analytical equipment at all. All we had was AccuWeather and a little 8x10 sheet of paper with the cold fronts and the warm fronts on them, talking about what the next couple days were going to be like.
But as far as out and covering it,
yeah,
it's the same as today.
How many storms do you think you covered here, Steve?
As far as hurricanes, tropical systems, I think 23, 24. Everyone was unique. Hurricane Bertha sticks out in that we were on Wrightsville Beach. Photographer Chuck Denton and myself, we actually had to hide out to stay on Wrightsville Beach. And we were there when the storm came across at noon in the daytime right over us.
even though it was, almost 1,000 miles away from Charlotte, you covered Katrina, did you not?
I did, but it affected people here. I'd never seen anything like that. That destruction. I remember doing a little thing on camera.
Just look at all the devastation you're going to see behind me.
Where I wanted to show that I was trying to get across to viewers that my camera cannot adequately show you how bad this is. And so I put my hand up on the lens and I walked like this and made a full circle, and everything that you could see around me was destroyed. Everything.
And I know you were always up in the mountains. Most of the time you were either in the foothills or the mountains. Talk about some of those big storms up there.
Well, the biggest was, of course, the 59 inches up on Mount Pisgah. I had a couple of station hats and $20 I gave to somebody who helped cut a way through the last mile to get to the top of the mountain. There were people that were stuck up there. That was in May, first week of May.
Actually, I thought
92. It shut down Highway 321. Boone and those areas were on their own.
2002. That ice storm took out more power in North Carolina than Hugo took out.
75 years, what do you think?
It's the only station I ever wanted to work for because this is the only station we ever watched.
I knew in advance of coming here that this was going to be just an unbelievable opportunity.
I can't believe it's 75 years. When I got into radio and when I lived in Tallahassee, Florida, I used to flip the EBS, which we weren't really supposed to do, flip the toggle up and listen to WBT radio at night. And I thought, I will find a way to get in and work in that building.
Incredible to hear their stories. Coming up next here on Your Side Tonight.
Early days, shot on film. How UNC Charlotte is helping us preserve part of history.
When you open up a box of archives, you really are transported back in time.
Plus, a look at how technology has changed over the years and what's to come in the future of television.
Welcome to PM Magazine from beautiful Maui.
Right, we're finishing up our week in the South Pacific on the beautiful island of Bora Bora.
Yeah, remember this? It's PM Magazine. Bob Lacey, Maura Quinn, traveling near and far to find unique places and people. And welcome back to our On Your Side Tonight special, celebrating WBTV's 75th anniversary. When that test pattern went over the air in 1949, Charlotte was home to roughly 130,000 people. Well, today, our city's population is more than 900,000. A lot has happened in between, and WBTV has been on your side for all of it. From Billy Graham to MLK, Dwight Eisenhower to Ronald Reagan, Evel Knievel to Richard Petty. The reports from those early days were shot on film, and UNC Charlotte is helping preserve that history. Photojournalist Gregory Simpson takes us through some of the archive.
We're at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and we're in J. Murray Atkins Library. On the 10th floor of Atkins Library, in the Dalton Reading Room, this is where anyone, members of the public, certainly any members of the community, worldwide scholars come here to do research with original materials about almost any topic relating to the Charlotte region. Well, we collect archives relating to the greater Charlotte region. These are records, original records that are of individuals, families, organizations that have been really significant in our community. We have our collections, they date back to the 19th century and even a little earlier, but we really are focused more on the late 20th century. The film reel archives from WBTV were transferred here and donated to the university in 2005. And it's about 800 film canisters. And each one of those may have more than one reel of film inside them. So it's quite a few reels of film. And it's mostly B-roll film, so it is sort of the film that you see in the news that's sort of behind what someone might be saying. Some of it does have audio, though.
Morning, the North American Air Defense Command sends a special message across.
Much of it does, and some of it doesn't have audio. It's just sort of scenes and what you can see that a camera operator might capture.
The organization here of this crusade is practically the same.
It shows a cross-section of Charlotte. It shows It shows many of the important events that occurred in Charlotte.
Maybe the need in America is not white power or black power, but striped power, where black and white get together and solve.
And I should say that the years that it covers are from the 1960s and 70s primarily. After the 70s, I think 16mm film was less used. So that's the time frame that we're talking about. But within that time frame, it really does have the people, the places, the events that happened in Charlotte, and you can really be transported there in time by looking at some of this B-roll footage. Archives are really where history lives, where history comes alive. It is how we know really what happened in the past. We have other ways of knowing about the past, such as our built environment, and in terms of buildings that are saved and preserved and things like that. But archives are so important to be able to see the original documentation, the original film, the original photographs, the original maps that were circulated in the past, so that we can really understand the details of what happened and how people lived their everyday lives and how people conducted their business in the past. So when you open up a box of archives, you really are transported back in time.
Watch that old stuff for hours. Over the years, WBTV has created dozens of shows. You might remember Carolina Calling, Top of the Day, or even PM Magazine. But few shows or special segments have had the lasting power of the Carolina camera. And John Carter is carrying on that tradition to this day. In fact, you see his stories during On Your Side Tonight. John?
Well, Carolina Camera is certainly near and dear to my heart, Jamie, and we've had such a wonderful response to it over the years. It introduces viewers to the most interesting and unusual people, places, and things here in the Carolinas, north and south. It debuted back in 1970. It's been on the air in some form or another since then. Mark Garrison, who's now news director at WBT Radio, was one of the most popular hosts of the series. I sat down with him to talk about the beginnings of Carolina Camera and the early days of WBTV.
A few feet from where we are now, it used to be these teletype machines. It was a constant stream of paper spitting out with stories.
A lot has changed in the newsroom since Mark Garrison began working at WBTV in 1978, 46 years ago. Where was your desk? Do you remember?
Oh, let's see, back in that corner. Yeah, it was back in that corner.
Buffalo on a pole. That tells you there's something different here.
Mark came to WBTV at a time when many of the personalities who launched the station in 1949 were still on board. Personalities who were the bedrock of WBTV's success.
They were just so warm and friendly. I mean, you talk about Clyde McLean, and people called him Cloudy. That was his nickname. And in those days, remember, as I know you do, there was no cable. So it was Channel 3, Channel 9, maybe Channel 36. So if you wanted to watch television in Charlotte or Western North Carolina, you were watching Channel 3. And so all of the people who were on the shows here almost became like your family because you were spending so much time with them.
If ever there was an honest, God-fearing, freedom-loving mountain man, it's Willard.
One of those early personalities was C.J. Underwood, the reporter who came up with the idea for Carolina Camera.
Now, you don't want to grab Willard till the liquor is ready to pour.
C.J. thought viewers would love to see stories about interesting people that you might not otherwise see in a newscast.
He was an absolute character. He had this sweet, simple Southern accent, and people just gravitated to him if you were out with him and if they happened to recognize him or thought they did, and he would just talk to anybody. And of course, that's what made him good at the Carolina Camera. He could talk to anybody. The other thing about him was he was an extremely good writer, so that when you tell those stories, the writing is pretty important. I mean, it's really important, and he was an excellent writer.
Over the years, a handful of reporters hosted Carolina Camera. Bill Ballard.
Is Siler City that you live in now anything at all like the Mayberry of the television scripts?
Ken Hudi.
Tom Melton is not the only man with a story.
Andrew Shore.
This is Andrew Shore for the Carolina Camera.
Terry Shields.
Several hundred.
Myself.
There's a snap!
And of course, Mark Garrison.
Why not charge more than $1.25?
Well, let's keep it cheap where everybody can go see it.
It was like, gee, I'm a professional visitor. I just ride around and get to know people and then tell their story. And I got to tell you, it's the best job I ever had.
Since it first aired in 1970, Carolina Camera has logged thousands of miles traveling across the highways and byways and back roads of the Carolinas, going to places known and not so well known from one end of the Carolinas to the other. And in that time, Carolina Camera has brought you countless stories that reflect the spirit and character of the people who live here and the places you can visit. Nearly 55 years later, Carolina Camera endures to this day.
I think it's because the kinds of stories that we do never go out of style. And what I mean by that is, I did a story once a long time ago on a guy, an old farmer who was really good with a slingshot called the bean shooter. Well, here we are 35 years later or longer, and that story has like 20 million views on YouTube. And that guy, bless his heart, he's long been dead.
Oh, yes.
But when I show that to people now, or when people find it, they're fascinated by it. And so those kinds of stories, people like people watching. We like to find out about interesting characters or quirky characters, and that's what the Carolina Camera is, and I think that's why it was so popular.
And of course, Carolina Camera continues to air on WBTV. You can see an all-new episode this coming Friday night during On Your Side Tonight with Jamie Bull at 7 o'clock. Jamie.
We are looking forward to that. John, thank you. You know, John picking up the mantle of the Carolina Camera, great example of what's made WBTV a trusted voice in our community. It's the continuity. A new face working with a familiar one before taking on new roles. Paul Cameron's story at WBTV fits the mold.
And then one day I got a call, come upstairs. And no sooner had my rear end hit the seat, they were saying, Mr. Inman is retiring, leaving, and we want you to move over to the anchor chair. And I said, what?
And the great news is Paul Cameron is going to be sitting here with us at 6 and 11. Welcome aboard.
It was 1996. Paul Cameron was Charlotte's go-to sports guy.
Outside, Detroit is as snowy and as cold as...
Over the previous 15 years, he had a front row seat to every major sporting event, every major sports story.
This is where the big deal happens, I hope, anyway.
Charlotte landing an NBA franchise.
I vividly remember the very first game they played against Cleveland, and I was asking one of the players, I said, hey, so how good is this team? You know, a franchise team. He says, not too good. And they lost. They lost by 40 that night.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
A few years later, it was the NFL coming to town. And while the big stories are memorable, Paul's biggest mark came in our small towns. When in 1982, he launched Football Friday Night.
I wanted to put local people on the air. And you can't get more local than high school football on a Friday night. And it became a real happening, because the football teams would sit in the locker room after the game and make sure Football Friday was on. Right. And the cheerleaders and the fans, and they'd go to pizza restaurants and make sure Football Friday was on.
Well, coming up in sports tonight.
So you can understand the pause when the station asked him to move from sports to news, to follow the likes of Doug Mays and Bob Inman.
And these were legends of Charlotte television. But you have to remember that television news wasn't that old when I got there. You know, really 1962 or 3 is when there was a full-time newscast on WBTV. And this was important, these people. They had been the pioneers.
What was the biggest challenge that you felt you had to overcome to make that leap from sports to news?
Well, I had to look in the camera and sound credible. It would be easy to dismiss someone who'd been doing fun and games into something serious.
It worked out pretty well. Paul would bring you the news for the next 22 years.
Mr. President, I'm curious.
He interviewed mayors and presidents, chronicled Charlotte growing up, reported from Guantanamo Bay after 9/11.
I was going to ask you, Paul, is there any part of the news business you miss?
I miss the excitement of the newsroom. Yeah. I do. I miss the people. I don't miss the hours. I don't miss the pressure.
The rush these days comes from chasing grandkids. And while he won't say it, we will. Paul continued building on the legacy of Charlotte's legacy TV station.
WBTV still has meaning to this day. I mean, people, they know WBTV is an old line TV station that has been doing this for years and years and years. And they look to that. And that's where that credibility comes in.
And for more than a decade, Maureen O'Boyle worked alongside Paul, bringing you the news at 5 and 6 p.m. Shortly thereafter, she also launched Charlotte's first 7 p.m. newscast, WBTV News Primetime. Her arrival at WBTV in 2004, well, it was special. It was a chance to report in her hometown.
I may have mentioned this once before, never probably on camera, but Lunis McGlowan, who was the programming director, played in a jazz band and played at my sister's wedding. So when I got the bug and wanted to be in broadcasting, I went to Lunis when I was 17, right. And he laughed in my face. And he's like, all right, I love you, kid, but please, I can't give you a job. Go out and get some experience and then come back to me.
Which is what you did. Almost exactly. You followed that game plan, right?
I did.
She worked at small-town TV stations before landing on a big-time nationally syndicated show. But there was always that pull of home.
Decision to come home and get the job then at WBTV. What did that mean to you to be able to step into that building and be part of such a legacy that the station has?
Well, that's exactly right. It was a legacy station, and it was immense to me. It was one of the most important chapters in my career, probably the most important chapter, actually. The longest chapter of my career. I was there longer than any of my other jobs because I loved it. And I also felt a sense of responsibility, as you do. We're the old timers there, or I was, and we know what the commitment has always been, and that has been to serve all aspects of the community.
Which meant tirelessly volunteering for area nonprofits.
But when you're out there in the community, whether it's raising awareness for a charity or fundraising for a charity, you then get this chance to look into the eyes of the people that you're representing, that you're educating in some way.
Maureen brought that spirit to the news every night. The stories weren't from some faraway place about unknown people. They were stories about our neighbors, our community.
I think I was probably the most annoying co-anchor because I was always on the verge of tears when stories were really sad. I'm a very empathetic person. It is the definition of me. So I think I approached all of those things with that knot in my throat or that pounding heart.
Today, you'll find Maureen enjoying the quieter life, often in her garden or with her family.
75 years now for WBTV. What does it mean to you to be such an important part of the legacy of that television?
Oh, wow. I'm grateful. You know, I was really fortunate. I had a job where we got to create the 7 o'clock show. That was a lot of fun. I worked with great people. You were one of my favorites. Really appreciate how much you always helped me through breaking news and day-to-day life there at the newsroom. I feel like I was really fortunate for that to be the end of my career. You know, it's a real high note for me.
And you know, the spirit of On Your Side is something we have been doing from the very beginning. In December of 1955, WBTV launched the first telethon in the Carolinas for the United Appeals Fund, a precursor to the United Way. This is a clip from that broadcast. WBTV still on your side, raising money for area nonprofits. Coming up next here on Your Side Tonight, from covering history to being part of it, Dedrick Russell talks with several trailblazers here at WBTV. The story of breaking barriers next. Well, this next conversation is a special one. WBTV's Dedrick Russell sat down with some former WBTV employees who made history here at the station. John Blunt was the first black anchor at WBTV. Debbie Gibbs, the first black female reporter. Ken Kuntz, first black male reporter. Jan Spence, the first black chief photographer. And James Suber was the first black engineer. They tell us their favorite memories and how they got started here.
Well, thank you all for coming back here to WBTV to help celebrate our 75th anniversary. So I just want to say, why did you choose WBTV as the place for your employment?
I was actually hired by the general manager because I was not allowed to cover a story when I was working in Winston-Salem. So they sent me to a convention of law enforcement from across North Carolina. and Mr. Crutchfield was there and interviewing the governor. Next thing I know, I hear this deep voice behind me, and it was Mr. Crutchfield, who said, "I want to call you later on." And 6 months later, I was here.
I really was reluctant to leave the newspaper world, and I think the news director finally called my husband, and my husband said, "They really want you. You ought to take that job." And I thought, why not?
I remember when we signed on, when BT signed on, I was a little fella watching my neighbor's television. I was sitting there waiting on somebody to say something.
And Ken Coons, talk to me about the memories. What's the special moment that you will never, ever forget while working here at WBTV?
Covering a forest fire in a $200 suit.
I knew it. I knew it.
I came in one morning. I had this new three-piece navy blue pinstripe suit, and we got over the radios about a forest fire over in Cleveland County near Shelby, and they sent me out there to cover it in my new suit.
Your new suit.
And so we got over there, and it was just like a little campground, a little campfire. And so I was so ticked off, I had the photographer to record me standing there in my new three-piece $200 suit.
I always remember WBTV, its commitment to the community.
What does On Your Side mean to you? I will go around real quickly. What does On Your Side mean to you, Mr. Blunt?
I would say it's a station that knows the community and does things for the community that it serves.
When we were working back in the 70s, the tagline then was "On the Scene." But either way, WBTV has a history of excellence, of being competitive.
If the community needs something, they're here for it.
Much more of that conversation, by the way, is online. As we celebrate, we're also mindful of those not with us, those in our WBTV family who we've lost since we celebrated our 70th 5 years ago. We're thinking of them tonight. So what a ride it's been. What's next? Stay tuned, or maybe it's stay online. Either way, we're going to be here on your side just like we have been for the past 75 years. And it's thanks in large part to all those men and women who are working and have worked behind the scenes to keep us on the air. We couldn't do it without them. We also couldn't do it without you at home. Thanks for watching all of these years. Have a great night, everyone.